Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Sanctuary, which is episode 10 of season 2 of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, one episode at a time. In this video, I cover the second season episode Sanctuary. So Sanctuary was the episode in which a group of aliens come through the wormhole, and they seem to be lost and distressed, and they soon find out that they are part of a group of 3 million refugees looking for a place to stay after their homeworld was invaded and they managed to escape their invaders. So they're looking for a homeworld, and Cisco volunteers to find them one. In the meantime, they're using the station to rest and to gather. Obviously 3 million people can't fit on the station, so most of them have to remain on their ships. However, even so, the station starts to become overrun with these Skrreean refugees, and some of the station's inhabitants, such as Quark and Nog, do not get along with these refugees and say that they are not welcome. Now, Cisco manages to find them a very suitable homeworld, a suitable planet that would be very ripe and good for colonization. However, at this stage, they decided that they'd rather colonize Bajor because they had determined that Bajor is the mythical planet in their legends, in their mythology that they've been searching for, and so they asked to colonize or populate a peninsula that is currently unpopulated, and that they insist that they could make habitable and grow fruit and vegetables, and make viable farmland again. However, Bajor is dealing with his own issues. It's in shambles after the Cardassian occupation and is still dealing with that, and so they determined that they just cannot absorb 3 million refugees at this time. When the refugees insist that they won't need any help, that they could end up actually helping each other, the Bajorans say they ran some projections and simulations, and the simulations say that the Skrreeans trying to colonize Bajor will end up dying off and require Bajor's help in order to survive, which they would not be able to just stand by as they die off, and so they would have to use valuable resources that they need in order to help them. So they refuse passage. This does not go over well with the Skrreeans, particularly the one in charge who had befriended Kira, calls Kira a traitor for not backing her up, and they go to colonize Draylon 2, the planet Cisco found for them. However, they leave in protest, and she particularly tells Kira that Kira made a huge mistake and let her fear and paranoia push them away. So, I'm not going to beat around the bush here. Well, I want to tackle the main... I usually try to save any political commentary or social commentary, social political commentary. Usually try to push that back to later, but the more I thought about it, I was like, let's not bury the lead. Let's address the elephant in the room. Let's tackle it straight on. Let's jump straight in to the political message, which is obviously about refugees, which is a very actually I would say more of the topic of immigration is a very hot button topic in the U.S. in particular right now, but in many Western countries. But in particular, the U.S. was made a big deal in this most recent presidential election, which, as I'm recording this, hasn't been decided yet, but by the time this is released, it will have been. So, but anyway, the whole thing with Trump saying they're eating the cats, they're eating the dogs, and they were talking about a bunch of Haitian immigrations and demonizing them, who are actually legal immigrants. They're not even refugees. However, they were escaping a bad situation in Haiti, a bad situation mainly caused by U.S. interference over the centuries. But that's neither here nor there. So it's yeah, and the whole Brexit thing was all about immigration and yeah, and then there's been all these other topics about specifically refugees and Trump refusing any refugees and how currently I think in order to get to the U.S. it takes some refugees like 10 years. So anyway, point is I'm not really going to speak to the present day situation, just bringing up the fact that there is an issue even in present day, and this episode was made 30 some years ago and it was relevant then and it's still relevant now. That's the only point that I am making. Now to the episode itself, here's the thing. I think that this episode isn't very successful in making modern day comparisons, either not modern day if you want to call it the 90s or even modern day now or even modern day 60s. It's not an apt comparison in Star Trek because Star Trek is a post-scarcity post-scarcity society, which means like it's supposed to be this perfect utopia where people want for nothing and it has unlimited resources, or at least the Federation does. The Bajor has been portrayed differently. However, Bajor is being helped by the Federation and has access to Federation technology. These Skrreean refugees are also being helped by the Federation and have access to Federation technology. So it doesn't really... It makes the whole comparison not work because the U.S. is not a post-scarcity society or any other Western country you want to compare it to where people are trying to immigrate into or where refugees are trying to enter. They're not post-scarcity. They don't have unlimited resources. And the U.S. doesn't even compare to Bajor because they hadn't just recently suffered a 50-year occupation. So it's just, in the way you slice it, this analogy doesn't work to modern times because of the whole post-scarcity thing. So I've heard a lot of different opinions, like just addressing this episode itself. It's funny, people seem to be really split on whether or not Bajor did the right thing by denying the Skrreeans to come to their world. I've heard very strong, passionate arguments on both sides. In fact, I do have a very strong position on this that I stated before on my channel, and I will get into again shortly, but I will say I even had a robust debate with my sister over this because she had the counterpoint than I did. She came on the opposite side that I did, which I was surprised, and I watched a bunch of reviews and some of them just now, and some of them came hard down on one side and some of them came hard down on the other. I think, well, at least from the reviews I read and the opinions I saw, which may be limited, but most of them tend to side with me or agreed with the same side that I do. And the stance that I take is that Bajor did the right thing, or at the very least it was completely understandable, and I kind of side with them and think that they have every right to do that. And further, I think that the Skrreeans were being unreasonable by expecting Bajor to allow them to immigrate there. Now, just to be clear, my stance on modern time is I'm usually pro-immigration, pro-refugees. I think Western nations like the U.S. should help refugees more than they do, and immigration should be encouraged. But, as I said, that issue doesn't translate to this episode because there's different factors in this episode, in this, hypothetical scenario in the Star Trek setting than there are in real life. As I said, I already brought up some of the differences already. The major one being the unlimited resources things, because for me that changes everything. That changes the whole dynamic because, and that's why it's not comparable to modern times, because, and that's why I come down in two different ways when you compare it to modern times as opposed to this fictional setting, which is why I think the analogy kind of falls apart, because I think they're trying to make this analogy to modern times, but it just, once you consider the Star Trek universe, it actually is not comparable, because the biggest thing here, and my biggest sticking point, and this is something that doesn't happen in modern times, or even, recent history or whatever, is that the Skrreeans are presented with an ideal planet, an entire planet for 3 million people. That is, 3 million people is not that big of a population. There's most major cities in the U.S. have more than 3 million people, just for comparison. So that's 3 million people for an entire planet. And it's a good planet. It's got a warm climate. It's going to be easy to farm there. They got the Federation, I'm sure. They didn't say it stated, but I'm sure they're willing to provide them with the resources that they need in order to get started, because there's a post-scarcity society, and get them set up. So they have a perfect, ideal, viable option. But they say, no, we don't want this ideal paradise planet. We want to go to Bajor. And what is the reason that they give? The reason they give is because, well, this is the planet in our mythology, that a planet of sorrow that's on the other side of the eye of the universe is what they're calling the wormhole. That's why they want to go there. Yeah, I'm sorry, but I don't give a shit about that. That is not a good reason to go. I'm sorry, but it just isn't. When they have this paradise planet handed to them on a platter, we'll give you all the resources, we'll give you all these things, and they say, nah, our religion says we're supposed to go to this planet that is already struggling and definitely cannot withstand 3 million refugees. So because of our religion says that we want to go there. Well, fuck you and fuck your religion. I'm sorry to be blunt, but here's the thing. So first of all, it's this mythology of the eye of the universe and the world of great suffering. That's kind of vague. They could apply that. They could find a whole bunch of planets and say, oh, that applies there. It's like the whole prophecy thing that can be interpreted or misinterpreted, and, it's probably bullshit to begin with. But let's say, for the sake of argument, it isn't. It's like the prophets, they actually do exist, and they actually do have prophecy and can prophesize the future. Even if that's true, she could be misinterpreted. It's just one lone farmer who herself says she's not special. She just so happened to be the one to find the wormhole, and she convinced all the other people, and none of them are leaders or really educated in this manner. They're all farmers. They all don't know what the fuck they're talking about. They don't even have any spiritual leaders left. And so they're just a random person who's just guessing off the top of the head. Well, this sounds about right. I think it's Bajor. So, number one, the prophecy is probably bullshit. Number two, even if it's not bullshit, she's probably wrong. There's no credibility to this. But putting those things aside, even if, let's say, she is divine, she happens to be the emissary for her people, whatever, and the prophecy is this vision from the prophets or whatever God it happens to be. Why would you go, populate a planet that's struggling when there's a perfectly viable one. Just because, oh, well, this prophecy tells me to do so. Well, fuck your prophecy. I'm sorry, but now, here's the thing. Here's the counter argument that I heard, because I wanted to hear out the other side, who were saying, and granted, as I said, there was more people on my side, but there was a few people on the other side. And I want to hear out the arguments that they were making as to why Bajor was in the wrong for not allowing these refugees to come. And to be fair, there's some good arguments. The prophecy, they didn't bring up the prophecy, but the thing is, the prophecy is the reason that these particular refugees gave. So I think it's kind of dishonest to not bring up the prophecy. But but there's other reasons. So she says, what's her face, the main character in this episode, says to Kira, we could have helped each other. We could have helped you. We could have made that land viable. You say it's no longer viable for farming. We're expert farmers. We could actually make it thrive, and that could have helped your planet. We could have helped each other. We could have done exchanges. We could have done trade. And this speaks to the argument that, and an argument I completely agree with in modern times, that immigrants can enrich a society, enrich a culture, make it better, make it stronger, make it more diverse. And so that's the strong argument, that by going off to Draylon 2, Bajor is worse off for it. And I can see that. And that does, because it speaks to the value of immigrants and how they can enrich a culture, and maybe it would have benefited Bajor and they would have benefited from it. So that is a strong argument. It's a valid argument. But my counter argument to that would be, it's a risk. And it's up to the Bajorans if they want to take that risk. And I want to point out that the Bajoran minister pointed out, even said that this was a highly debated topic, and it was a very heated debate. So that means, like, in the Bajoran parliament, or whatever you call their government, the chamber of ministers or whatever, there were a lot of ministers, like representatives of Bajoran regions, who were fighting passionately for allowing the Skrreeans to come. So there were some. In fact, it seemed to be a pretty, like they said, it was a really heated argument that lasted a long time. So there seemed to be quite a significant, I would say, amount of ministers on the Skrreean side saying, yes, it is in our culture to help others, let them help. So they did seriously consider this. They didn't just reject them out of hand. It's not like, it's not a planet of xenophobes, and that's, even the ones who are against it were not coming from it from a xenophobic perspective, although knowing that the circle thing just happened not that long ago, I'm sure that there were some ministers like that. But that's not, from what I get, from what I understand, and from the arguments they're making, that is not the prevailing dominant ideology that won out. It was not xenophobia. It was more of pragmatic, I would say, thought, more of a practical thought, because the minister pointed out they ran these simulations and these tests and predictions based off of science and experts in the field, and they determined the most likely scenario is that the Skrreeans would fail to make that peninsula viable, and then would need Bajor's help. Now, what's-her-face from the Skrreeans insists that those projections are wrong, because they don't know the Skrreeans like they do. Which is a possibility, is 100% a possibility. But it is not 100% definitely the case. And it's still, as far as any Bajoran, any rational, reasonable, scientific objective observer on the situation would say that the chances are more likely that they fail. So, even if they're wrong, I completely understand Bajor's reluctance to take that risk. Because that would be a huge risk. They're taking a huge chance of having to lose resources and lose valuables. And the most likely outcome is that would happen. The most likely outcome is that the Skrreeans would fail and that some of them would die and that they would be in dire need and Bajor would have to stretch their limited resources to help them. When there's a perfectly viable paradise planet sitting right there for them to take, where there is a 100% chance that the Skrreeans will be fine. So, forgetting the whole prophecy thing aside and just going on the whole strength of immigrants enrich the society, which is something I truly believe, in this particular fictional scenario, there's a risk. And according to the scientists and experts, most likely is definitely, not definitely, but most likely, let's say, they didn't give a percentage, but from the way we were talking, let's say 60% or 70%, something along that ballpark. That, in fact, the way they talked, I would actually put it more in the field of 80%. I think, or 75 or something like that. But let's be fair, let's say 60. Even so, they said it was definitely greater than not, so it's above 50. That they fail and they start dying off and Bajor has to help them. Which is not only bad for Bajor, it's bad for the Skrreeans. So when Bajor says, we are not just making this decision for ourselves. Again, they're not doing it out of xenophobia, as I'm sure a few of them are. But the majority are not making this decision out of xenophobia. They're doing it for the benefit for the Skrreeans. Because their chances are way better off going to this perfect planet where it's a 100% chance they'll be fine. So, I'm sorry, and my decision, I think the Bajor did the absolute right thing, or at the very least an understandable thing. And I think that Hanik, or whatever her name is being completely unreasonable. Or being upset with Kira. Because Kira was trying to let her down nicely, trying to be polite and trying to be like, look, this is the best thing, not just for Bajor, but for you. You have a perfect paradise planet where you have a 100% chance of being fine. That's your best shot for you. That is the best thing for you. And she is 100% correct in saying that. And Hanik is like, oh, well, my prophecy religion thing, blah, blah, blah. Who cares about your religion? I'm sorry. In the face of practicality, in the face of 60% likely chance that you all die, or at least like some of you die and you have to strain Bajor's already strained resources, whereas 100% chance you'll be fine. Like, take them, obviously. I don't care about your religion. Obviously, you're going to take the 100% chance of being fine. So, and I just want to make clear that, again, this doesn't relate. This is not comparable to modern times. In that, in modern cases, most of the time, yes, allow immigrants, allow refugees, help them out, benefit them. Immigrants enrich society. But in this particular fictional scenario that they present, they get a perfectly viable planet. So the other factor in here is that I think the writers don't, again, in presenting this situation, don't really fully understand the post-scarcity society that Star Trek is supposed to be, because they talk about a famine on Bajor, and that factors into Bajor's decision. Oh, there's already a famine going on, and the Skrreeans are like, oh, we can help you with the famine. why is there a famine on Bajor when the Federation has replicator technology and the Federation is aiding Bajor? That's already been made very clear. Hell, they could use the replicators on the freaking station to to feed millions of Bajorans. But this, this is information from the future. But in like season 4, Kira mentions that the Federation gave Bajor an industrial grade replicator. So I don't know exactly what that is. I don't think anyone knows exactly, because it's not really stated exactly what that is in the show. But from the name, that's kind of implied that that can feed a fuck ton of people. A replicator where you just say, oh, give me this food, boom. Industrial grade implies that they're not just making dinner for one, that they could make dinner for 1,000 or possibly 1 million in a blink of an eye. Give me this, give me that, give me this, give me that. And granted, you're talking about feeding an entire planet, and there would have to be distribution. But I think I can't remember. I don't think Bajorans have transporter technology, but the Federation does. So they could use their transport technology along with the replicator to transport the food instantly to anywhere on the planet. Say, all right, give me 1 million food, boom, beam it there. Oh, give me 1 million of this, boom, give me 1 million blankets, boom, beam it there, boom, boom, boom. Imagine how many people you could feed and clothe and with that kind of technology. So why is there a famine on Bajor again? Like, why are they talking about farming when they have fucking replicator technology? Like, this is, to me, this is like the writers not understanding this. Not understanding that the Federation's technology, and if they're not sharing it with Bajor, why the fuck not? Their whole point in being in Deep Space Nine is to help Bajor, so there's no reason why they. And as I said, even though this wasn't written yet, it happens in season 4. They specifically state that they gave them an industrial grade replicator, so there should be no famine. So this is kind of a side effect of this whole scenario. Shouldn't actually be the case. Now, maybe there's an argument to be said that the industrial grade replicator wouldn't be enough that it would strain it too much to have 3 million people come. But even then, it's like, yeah. So, and that's the argument I heard. To be fair, that's one of the arguments I heard for allowing Skrreeans to go to Bajor. And to be fair, this argument actually is correct, that Bajor should have infinite resources because of the Federation technology. Therefore, they should be perfectly fine to allow the Skrreeans. But for me, I don't see that as an argument of why the Bajorans were wrong to reject the Skrreeans. I see this as a plot hole that the writers weren't thinking of, because it kind of destroys the whole scenario. So that's how I see it. I don't see it as, the Bajor's being selfish by not letting them go. I see it as the writers are not taking into account the fact that this is the post-scarcity society and that the Federation could instantly feed everyone in Bajor. Anyway, so there's that. So that kind of destroys like this whole scenario. So I kind of have to not think about that and overlook that oversight, which is, I think, very obviously a plot hole. Now that that's out of the way, sorry, I just had to tackle that straight on. Getting into the episode itself, it's fine. So it starts off with the whole universal translator malfunction thing, which is an interesting concept because, again, let's be fair, universal translator was just a plot device that was made up to be because people in the original series would be like, well, people watching would be like, well, how come these alien races all speak English? Like, Kirk and Spock beam down to this planet and they instantly speak English. And they're like, there's something called a wizard. No, not a wizard. That's a fantasy show. Universal Translator. So it's just this magical technology that they happen to have that's in everywhere. It's implanted in their heads. It's in their communicators. It's all over the place. You don't think about it. Don't worry about it. It just means that everyone speaks English. Now, granted, really what they're saying is that they're speaking their own language, but people hear it as English. That way, we, the viewers, can hear it as English or whatever, or Federation Standard or Earth Standard or whatever they call it in the future. I think it's Federation Standard. Yeah. So that's why everyone's speaking English. So, but it was interesting that they played off of it a bit and be like, well, it's, and to be fair, Enterprise does play off it, shows that it's in its infancy and that they still need a language expert because it doesn't always work and they have to program it sometimes, that it's not this perfect magical device that it is in the 24th century. So that was kind of interesting, having the universal translator, and that makes sense for the species for the Gamma Quadrant. In fact, it doesn't make sense why this didn't happen already. But it doesn't really, it's kind of just there to delay the plot, really. It doesn't really do anything. It doesn't really factor in. It's like once the translator starts working, it's just, I guess, I think it's kind of a device so that they could have these funny scenes with them, like grabbing stuff and taking stuff and Odo having to put it down and them following them around the station and them going like, ooh, we don't understand you. It's just it's kind of a filler thing, to be honest. And I've heard other people talk about how the whole structure of this episode is kind of off. It seems there's like a kind of a lot of unnecessary plot points, like the son getting into fights with Nog, and the other plot point with, I don't know, like the ugly dress, or the whole thing with the kids escaping the Bajor, trying to force themselves on Bajor, and then getting destroyed in the process. That was a good sequence, by the way. I did enjoy it, but it didn't really push the plot forward in any way. I mean, some of these things, I guess the reason they exist is they're not entirely pointless, because they exist to show to portray the Skrreeans as kind of unwelcome or unusual. Like, some people were pointing out the fact that they, have multiple husbands, and it's a, matriarchal society where they think males are kind of shouldn't be involved in any decisions or powers, and they kind of laugh at seeing men in power and stuff like that. Stuff like that is meant to try to alienate them and make them seem more other, more alien, more different, more unwanted. Like, ooh, we don't want these people to migrate to our planet. They're weird. Like, they have multiple husbands and they don't think men are worth anything. So, yeah, we don't want those people here. Which, again, that does relate to modern day society, where there's different cultures, and that's part of the reason people give the xenophobes in particular, not the xenomorphs. No, the xenophobes, they give for not wanting immigrants is because, they got weird, funny cultures, and they're corrupting our pure culture and shit like that, which is kind of, Nazi talk, but that's another topic entirely. But yeah, no. So I think that's why they presented it that way in this episode, to sort of present, maybe Bajor. But ultimately, like, you could make an argument. Maybe some of the people who do side on the other side of me do make the argument that Bajor is letting those factors drive them, that they are letting their bigotry or their fear of something unusual and unknown drive them. But I would argue that's not the case. I mean, I'm not saying it doesn't exist entirely, but I think it's very clear that that's not the driving force, because they have a damn fucking good argument as to, you got this perfect paradise planet. It's not like we hate you. We don't want you to die. Here's perfect paradise planet right there for the taking. We're 100% you're going to be fine. So I honestly think that is by far the driving factor, more so than any of these, oh, you're weird and different. So I think that's what they were trying to do. And so I actually do see that as kind of a non sequitur, really, a distraction. But it kind of another way to look at it is like details that sort of enrich or complicate the situation, which I am all for. Like, that all makes sense. So, I mean, it's fine, I guess. In the end, I'm kind of okay with it. So I do like, as I said, I like this scene at the end, even though I don't think it's supposed to, like, show the tensions between Bajor and the Skrreeans, but it's not necessary. But it's a good scene, though, because I like the fact that we get to see more Bajorans in, positions of power in this episode. We get to see another minister, who's actually played by Armin Shimmerman's wife, who will appear later on as Luarin, the Vorta, in the episode Tacking in the Wind. Amazing episode. Kitty Swink, I believe her name is. And she does a good job, too, in that role. And then we see a Bajoran Vedic. And when they have the incident, the thing I love about the incident is the Bajoran pilots who are going to warn off the Skrreean vessel, and Kira calls them, is like, I order you to stand by, and they're like, nope, you're a major. We have orders from a colonel. Outranks you. And so she's like, Kira's like, oh, hold on 1 second, that colonel's going to be calling you shortly to, override your orders. So they call the colonel, and you get him on the screen, and he's like, what's this about? Or maybe it was a general, actually. I think it was a general. Some high-up military guy. And they call him, and he's like, what's this about? And Sisko has to explain it to him, and he's like, oh, yes, have him stand down. But it shows, like, the bureaucracy. And so it takes too long, step by step, and by the time they get them to stand down, it's too late. They are already fired their weapons, and just by firing it, it ignites their loose plasma, and they're destroyed. And it shows, like, sort of a breakdown in bureaucracy. So there's a couple of ways this could relate to the main plot. So maybe it is another way of enriching the plot, even if it's not entirely necessary. On one, it shows the desperation of the Skrreeans. And it shows the fear the Bajorans have of the Skrreeans, that they're, freaked out as soon as just because one ship was approaching the planet. It also showed how, so that's, points for the Skrreeans, at the advantage of why they are correct, why they should help Bajor, and Bajor's letting their fear stop them. But on the other side, it shows the bureaucracy and how in shambles Bajor is, and because they couldn't even get their bureaucracy, they had to call the major, had to call the people and the pilots, and then they didn't do it, so they had to call the general, and they had to explain to a general. And then the general had to tell the pilots, and by the time it got back to them, it was too late. So it sort of describes that Bajor's kind of not in a position to help anyone, because their whole government's in shambles and are not that effective, and the bureaucracy doesn't work. And so if the Skrreeans tried to immigrate on their planet, the bureaucracy would probably fuck up and fail them as well. So they're better off not trusting Bajor, because they can't even help themselves. So it sort of shows that on that side. And to make it clear, I think this is a really plus for the episode. The fact that it presents such a complex scenario where people who watch it, people who sometimes agree on other things, could come down on different sides of the issue. It shows that it's a well-written script, and it's a really nicely thought-up scenario. But I will say, as an episode itself, though, it's not structured perfectly. As I said, there's a lot of the side plots with, and there's something that someone else pointed out that I think is totally true, is that the son, you don't even realize that it's Hanik's son until the end, where she flat out says, like, it's not really made clear. It doesn't really feel like his son, and so I don't think do a really good enough job of really fleshing out these characters or getting you to care about them. So I will say that. But yeah, I mentioned Armin Shimmer's wife. There was also the actor I recognized instantly as the guy who played Boner on Growing Pains, who was actually, I'm trying to get his name. I think it's Andrew Koenig, who's actually Walter Koenig's son. I had no idea that was Walter Koenig's son. And I recognized him instantly. And then we have the musician, the Bajoran musician. Oh, that's another thing that was kind of an irrelevant side plot that was just distracting from the main plot and showing how this the plot or the script was just all over the place. The whole thing with the musicians. I mean, again, it's trying to show how Bajor's in shambles and everything like that, and sort of enrich the Bajoran culture, but still, it's just like, it doesn't flow right. But anyway, that guy was played by William Scarlett, something like that. Anyway, he was in the original series. He played Niles Barris or whatever from The Trouble with Tribbles. You know, the annoying bureaucrat. It was like, Kirk, I'm going to have your head. Like, I did not recognize him, but as soon as it was pointed out to me, I'm like, oh, yeah, that is him. But, yeah. And then one of the other actors who played one of Hanik's husbands, one of two of her husbands, I recognized him this time around. I don't think I've ever recognized him from watching this before, because he didn't have that many lines. He was just kind of an extra who went around like, but it was Leland Orser, who I've seen in a whole bunch of things. In Seven, he played this guy who was forced at gunpoint to kill a prostitute. And in Very Bad Things, he played this guy who accidentally killed a prostitute. And in Star Trek Enterprise, the episode Carpenter Street, he played this guy who abducted prostitutes that the Xindi killed. So I didn't realize until I thought about it, but this guy is always playing characters that's killing sex workers. It's like, what? And I want to make it clear that I am very much against the cliche of the whole dead prostitute thing, because that's dehumanizing, people who exist, who just happen to work a certain job that society has deemed, disgusting or unholy or whatever. And I don't know why there's these jokes about dead prostitutes and stuff like that. But I'm not the one who made these movies. I'm just telling you that this actor is always playing guys who's killing prostitutes. I don't know why. But he was also he was also in the Voyager episode. I can't even remember the name of that Voyager episode, but he played this crazy hologram who killed his crew. But I'm pretty sure none of his crew were prostitutes. so he just killed other people in that episode. But he's always killing people. He's always typecast as a guy. He's this crazy guy. I know. Let me see what else he's been in, because I know I've seen in some other things where he didn't actually kill anyone. Apparently he was in Taken. I don't know who he was in that. Oh, he was in Alien Resurrection, and I think he was just part of the crew. I'm sure he didn't kill anyone there. But anyway, I've seen this actor a lot of places, and I reckon he was in 24. I wonder if he killed anyone there. Maybe not. Yeah, ER, did he play a doctor that accidentally killed someone? Alright, I just stop. Anyway, yeah. So I think that's pretty much all I gotta say about the episode. It was fine. It had a very thought-provoking commentary, but it doesn't actually fit with modern day. It's not a good analogy for modern day because the Star Trek world just makes it different. And the script was kind of all over the place. Not really. I mean, some of the scenes you could say are necessary. Some you could say enriched the background and gave it more nuance and more complexity. But I don't know. I lie somewhere in the middle of useless and nuance. But anyway. I would now like to thank all those that support me on Patreon. It's very much appreciated. It does help me continue with the channel. I want to give a big special thanks to Brandon Neal Howells, Antarius, and Jordan Johnson. Thank you all so very, very much for your very strong support. I'd also like to give a shout out to Benjamin Mead, Greg Marley, Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Matty Jester, Joel Lavals, Alessandro Miglosio, Norman Buchwald, Stephen Kennedy, Britton Berg, and Allison Fordyce. Thank you all so very much for your support. Alright, so we have a few patron comments on this episode. First comment is from Stephen Kennedy, who says, "This was an okay episode. I never knew Walter Koenig's son, Andrew, played Tumak. Unfortunately, he hanged himself in 2010. So my rating is 6. I don't want to talk about the subject matter regarding this episode as I would go on a rant. So the floor is yours, Mark from Enchantment of Eternity. Whatever you say, I know I will agree with it. Out of 10. Okay. I hope you did agree with it, but I guess whatever I said, so that means you must agree with what I just said. I don't know. I did hear that he hanged himself. That is very sad news. I knew that Boner from Growing Pains played in this episode. I didn't know that Boner from Growing Pains was Walter Koenig's son. That one is what's news to me. But yeah, very, very sad news. Way to bring everything down, Steve. No, I'm just kidding. Anyway, not like this is already an upbeat episode. Anyway, next comment is from Kyrie091, who says, "Sanctuary, more like Stanktuary." I don't remember this episode. I'm assuming it's a lousy episode because it doesn't have Vic Fontaine, and as we all know, Vic Fontaine is what makes Star Trek great. So next comment is from Norman Buchwald, who says, "Sanctuary is an episode that probably has more meaning these days, but it's especially intriguing as the issue here is a huge immigration community wanting to set home in some way within the Bajoran system, and the Bajorans, weary after decades of occupation, spurn them away for Kira. It's especially frustrating as she admired the leader and wanted to help her. I did like how the Universal Translator took its time. We get our second mention of the Dominion, although interestingly, how the people got away from their captors due to the Dominions conquering them, which almost makes one wonder why the Dominion let this inhabited race, who are all solids, get away or not be under their supervision, almost making me wonder if the creators had fully figured out the Dominion yet. I would have cut the part where the leader's son gets killed. It added stakes and whatnot where I would have cared more about her as a leader. Why not someone else gets killed for being forthright? The derogatory comments made towards them is especially hitting at home, hitting us at home, where we have current political candidates calling immigrants vermin and making up atrocious stories that they have definitely not been confirmed. Still, it's quite a story to be shown in what we've always called until now Roddenberry's Trek. Yeah, they could have been happy to settle elsewhere, but going by their beliefs is compelling enough to compare them to the Bajorans who have their own religious beliefs. Given that, the writing overall and direction of this episode somehow makes what should have been a more poignant, important, and thematically type of episode, considering how preachy but good past tense will be a season later. It seems this script needed perhaps more revisions. Still, I will give this a weak 7 out of 10. So that's a good point you bring up about the Dominion. I did forget to mention that this is the second mention, second out of 3 mentions of the Dominion that we'll get before this season finale. I do think it's been confirmed that they had not fully fleshed out the Dominion at this stage. In fact, I don't think that... so they had, I believe it was Robert Hewitt Wolfe. Ira Steven Behr assigned him to come up with a sort of Bible or dossier or guidelines to who the Dominion are. And I don't believe he finalized that until shortly before the episode The Jim Hadar, but I could be mistaken. So he came up with, the Jim Hadar and the Founders and the Vorta, but I don't believe that the Changelings it was decided that the Changelings would be the Founders until they were writing this search. I could be mistaken about that, but I'm pretty sure so that they didn't know the thing about solids. I would say they definitely didn't know when writing this episode. In fact, I would say that the only thing they knew about the Dominion when they were writing this episode was a vague, and also rules of acquisition, was just a vague concept that they wanted to do some sort of anti-federation. So I get the impression when Hanik says, they were conquered by some, I don't know who they were, but they were members of the Dominion. So in retrospect, knowing what we know about the Dominion, we can say it was probably the Jim Hadar. But the way she says it does make me sound like that the original concept for the Dominion was that it would be like the Federation, where there would be tons of different equal members. But what they ended up going with is basically Dominion was just it was owned by their supreme rulers, the Changelings, the Founders, who genetically created Vorta to serve them as their bureaucrats, and the Jem'Hadar as their soldiers. So it was basically just genetically created armies created by the Founders, and they basically control everyone else. Now, we do see them make an alliance with the Cardassians, and we do see that from the beginning, from the episode The Search onwards, we see that they do try to conquer or bring other races into the Dominion through diplomacy, but it's the whole carrot and stick thing. If the carrot fails, then they bring out the stick, which is the Jem'Hadar. I believe one of the writers even mentioned it using that analogy. So, but they do try diplomacy. So it's feasible that there are other aliens within the Dominion. In fact, I wrote a couple fan fictions speculating about different alien species in the Gamma Quadrant that are within the Dominion that were just willing participants, joining because they wanted more power, much like the Cardassians or the Breen for that matter, and that they benefit from that because all they have to do is serve the Founders and take the orders from the Founders whenever they give it, but other than that, they can do whatever they want. So, here is my headcanon fan speculation that it was in fact not the Jem'Hadar who conquered I don't remember what the hell they're called, whoever was conquering Hanik's people. Yeah, it was a weird name. I can't remember it, but it wasn't the Jem'Hadar. It was just some other random alien that we hadn't met who willingly joined the Dominion, and the Dominion lets them do whatever the fuck they want as long as they, don't disobey the founders and always pay tribute or whatever and give them a percentage of their resources and whatnot, and they're okay with it, mutual beneficial. And so they decided to conquer this world. Maybe they even asked the founders, Vorta, whatever, first. They might have been like, hey, you guys cool if we conquer this other world? We want the resources. And the Vorta's like, yeah, fine, whatever, I don't care, bring them into the Dominion. Or maybe the Vorta ordered them to. Although, if that was the case, they would have just got the Jem'Hadar to do it. But maybe they wanted to test their loyalty or something. I don't know. For that matter, it could just easily been the Jem'Hadar. But I think it's more interesting to think that it was random alien who decided they wanted to conquer. But this would explain why they left the Skrreeans alone. Because they didn't give a shit about the Skrreeans. They just wanted the other planet's resources. And Dominion probably... the Vorta was like, this is an insignificant world. These Skrreeans don't have any resources. I don't give a shit. You do what you want. That could have been the case. And even if it was the Jem'Hadar, maybe they didn't give a shit about the Skrreeans. I get your point about the changeling wanting to control all solids. But if they see that they have no resources and they pose no threat, they might not give a shit. They might not want to devote the resources into wiping them out because it's just too much. It's not worth it. That could always be the case. Either one. I just think it's more interesting to think that there's more different races within the Dominion. Anyway, next comment is from Benjamin Mead, who says, I think I might like this episode more than most. For some reason, it's stuck in my mind as the typical episode representing early seasons of DS9. In the Dark Ages, the time between the original airing and widespread availability of DVD and streaming, I used to mistakenly think this episode was in Season 1. And when I got to Season 1 DVD, I was really confused because this episode wasn't there. I really like the plot point about the Universal Translator. I always liked the screen makeup, too. The actress who played Hanique was very good. I thought I also appreciated the complexity of the dilemma in this episode. I have trouble picking a right side, and I think that is a hallmark of a good story. Yeah, I was saying that about this episode, too, that it presents a dilemma that has no right answer, so people could fall on either side, and that does make it very interesting. Although I think there's a clear side, but that's just my humble opinion. I know there's plenty of other people who have a strong feeling towards the other way. Now, as far as thinking this episode was in Season 1, so for me personally, and I think it's very interesting to hear your personal experience with that. I do find that fascinating. But my personal experience, at this stage, I was still taping every episode off the TV and watching them over and over again. So I was very familiar with this episode, and I very much knew it was in Season 2. We will get to a point in Deep Space Nine where I stopped taping it off the TV, and so I was less familiar with the episodes. In fact, I even missed an episode or two, but we haven't gotten to that point yet. It's a couple seasons away, but I will point out when I get to the point where I stopped taping it off the TV, so I was a bit less familiar with the episodes. But we're not there yet. I also think of this episode as a representative of the early seasons as well. When I think, particularly in Season 2, when I think of this, like we've reached the point in Season 2 where it gets kind of bland in the middle. It's not like this is still a good episode, so it's not like it totally sucks. So it's gonna get even more bland. But it's like, as I said, Season 2 had a strong start and a really strong finish. Like, it gets really good at the end of Season 2, but that middle is where it starts to sort of blend together, and this to me was like representative of that. Anyway, next comment is from Antarius, who says, this episode contains a topic that could hardly be more politically current. Unfortunately, the script does not manage to make a really entertaining and interesting episode out of this topic. Instead, they concentrate on too many side plots in the first half. The bit about the ship going to Bajor fails, especially since it all happens off-screen. We hardly know the ones on board. This is one of the few episodes addressing the Universal Translator. In the past, I always thought this piece of technology was more fantasy than science fiction, but with the rapid pace of technology, with the rapid progression in AI technology and translation apps, it doesn't seem so unrealistic by now, but I still don't understand how it works. Does everyone always have some piece of technology in their ear that translates the words simultaneously? Do they hear the translation and original words at the same time, or does it somehow block the foreign language so you don't hear it? Does Picard speak English or French on board the Enterprise? My rating is a 5 out of 10. So I think what is implied with the Universal Translator is that you don't hear the original language, that you just hear it as your own language. Now, I don't know exactly how that works. I would assume, like, when there's a word, like, it doesn't let you know when they say a word that's not translatable, or does the Universal Translator make you aware that its translation is approximate? Because sometimes it wouldn't be a direct translation, especially if you're dealing with alien languages. So I don't know how that would work, but I do get the impression that they instantly hear it, so I guess you would say it does block the original language. It's what they say and what they hear is different, so their lips would not move in the right way, but on the show it does, because the actors are all speaking English. So yeah, I don't know exactly how that would work, but I do get the impression that no. And the funny thing is, I think I told the story before, when I used to watch this with my ex-wife. Every time someone would say an alien language, like say something in Klingon, like kapla or something like that, she'd always go, "Oh, the Universal Translator is failing again." It's decided to not work, because that was her thing. Is like how if there's a Universal Translator that's constantly translating everything, how can people say stuff in a different language? But I recently heard some fansplaining or headcanon about that, saying that I don't think this is ever made official canon, but saying that the Universal Translator can read minds, apparently, because you can decide not to translate something. If you want your original word to be heard in your language, you can somehow decide, like, turn off the translator for the one word, or decide just by thinking. I don't know. Then it does make it seem a bit magical, honestly. So I don't know. The truth of the matter is, they just want to have an excuse of why all these people are speaking English. That's it. Like, in retrospect, they kind of come up with the rules in it, but they're working backwards and trying to explain why everyone's speaking English. So that is the only real correct answer on how the Universal Translator works. It works however the plot needs them to, just to explain that why everyone's speaking English. And that's all there is to it. But I do get your meaning about modern day technology is actually becoming more realistic by the second. There already is a device, apparently, that will or an app or something that will translate instantly. Like, you speak into it and then you play it back, and it plays what you just said in a different language. So yeah, that's very close to Universal Translator. So I mean, it will never be as magical as this because it's unrealistic. It's fantasy-like, but it's approximate, something close to it. Alright, so final comment is from Brandon Neal Howells, who says, this is a difficult episode to like for several reasons. One, they spend way too much time on the translator not working. 2, the Bajoran government is hardly functioning, and no surprises there, so the rejection of the Skrreeans is no surprise whatsoever. In the original story, the Skrreeans were allowed to stay on Bajor, which shouldn't have been changed in my opinion. 3, the plot with Haneek's son stealing a ship and getting blown up was a total cop-out because we didn't see it on screen, and that really pissed me off. Bajoran Kenny G and his singing holograms weren't needed either, and just by the way, Quark is a racist. 5, Haneek saying "we are farmers" every 10 minutes out of 10. Yeah, she did say that quite a bit. And yes, Quark is a racist. Yeah, it's a funny thing because I've been listening to the Delta Flyers podcast, and Armin Shimon guest stars on that regularly, and he did the one for this episode, and he really defends Quark, like, hard out. He always makes excuses for Quark and be like, oh, this is Quark, his Ferengi culture and everything. And sometimes I'm like, yeah, I get, like, that was the character you played for 7 years, but, and you got to try to get in his head and his mindset in order to play him like any good actor would, but still, it's like, you're stretching it. Yeah, like, you are definitely stretching it. And so I was just thinking that because he would argue with the fact that the statement that Quark is a racist, but he totally is. He totally is. But anyway, yeah, so you're the second person to bring up the whole thing with the battle sequence at the end not being good because it happened off screen. I don't know if I would agree with that, because it happened off screen in the same way that the battles in the Wounded happened off screen. And I don't know, maybe you would complain about those battle scenes as well. But for me, I think it didn't seem off screen to me because you got to see Kira and Cisco and Haneek and their reactions. You got to hear the Bajoran pilots. You saw the Bajoran general and you saw the little diagrams of the ships firing at each other. I don't know. For me, that was good enough. Like, I wouldn't actually need to see the ships or need to see the people in the ships. Like, to me, they're not really the point of the scene. The point of the scene is more of Kira and Haneek and their reactions. So from a story perspective, I think it actually made more sense to stay on them. And I just appreciated being able to see that random Bajoran general. I think that was a nice touch. So I personally didn't have a problem with it, but I do agree with you on the fact that there was way too many storylines and they were unnecessary, such as the Bajoran Kenny G. I think that's doing him a disservice because he's more like I think he's supposed to be more like a Mozart type than a Kenny G type. He's supposed to be this great classical musician who's, one of the well-known artists of Bajoran society. I would not say Kenny G is like that. Definitely not. But that is just me. But I agree. Like, that's, too many storylines, and they're supposed to give the story texture, but in some ways they do, but in other ways they just make the story a bit of a mess and make it kind of all over the place. Anyway, thank you, patrons, so much for your comments. So my rating for Sanctuary out of 10 is going to be a 7. Very good. I think it's going to be a weak 7. I was kind of all over the place on what rating I should give this, from a 5 to a 6, and then finally decided on a 7, but a very weak 7, as I said, like bordering a 6. Like, it's very close to giving this episode a 6, but I'm giving it the benefit of the doubt and giving it a 7 because of the fact that the moral dilemma is so interesting, and that so many different people have so many different interpretations, and there is no right or wrong answer, that there's different ways to look at it, and it brings up different perspective and different arguments, and that this episode is, as much as it is a mess with too many side plots, it is definitely fleshed out. It's definitely got a lot of nuance to it, a lot of complexities, a lot of different factors that sort of factor into what drives this dilemma. So for me, that's why I decided to push it to a 7. But I called it a weak 7, and definitely wouldn't get more than a 7 because yes, the plot's all over the place. I don't think the characters were that well developed. Like, I didn't give a shit about the boy who was played by Boner from from Growing Pains. Like, I didn't give a shit about him. He was just kind of annoying. The scenes with Nog were annoying. Like, when he hissed like a cat, when he that was kind of dumb. And as I said, like the Bajoran Kenny G, like, it gives it texture, but was he really necessary? Was that scene, even as cool as it was with the battleships fighting at the end, was that really necessary? I don't know. It just seemed out of focus and kind of all over the place and not developed as strongly as it could be. And what I mean by that, because you might be, what do you mean by not developed? You're talking about how there's all these nuance to it. Aren't you contradicting yourself? No, what I mean by not developed is not the nuance. The nuance is all the flavor to it. We don't get to know any of the characters, like Boner or Unique or her husbands. They're just kind of caricatures more than characters, as well as the actress did a really good job, I will say. But yeah, it wasn't really well honed in, and as I said, the plot, kind of a mess. So 7 out of 10 for me. So that's it for my review of Sanctuary. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to leave a like, leave a comment if you like. Where do you fall in the big moral dilemma? Am I totally wrong or am I totally right? Or do you not really care and fall somewhere in between? Or what do you think of this episode? Am I not being unfair to it, or am I being too fair to it? Something like that. Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you'd really like to support the channel, you can check out my Patreon. There will be a link to that in the description below. There's different tiers for different budgets, different rewards, such as you can make a comment that I'll read in my videos like I just did. There's a series of videos I make exclusively for Patreon supporters where I revisit reviews that I've already made. You can request a video for me to review. I got pre-releases where I release videos 2 weeks in advance. Stuff like that. You can check it out if you're so inclined to do so. But even if you're not, you can still want to support the channel. You can still very much help me out by leaving that like, subscribing, stuff like that. Also really helps. Alright, so let's see what's coming up next on the old channel here. Where are we at? So Wednesday will be my review for Rivals. Thursday will be my review for Lower Decks Season 5, Episode 7. Saturday will be my review for the Pegasus. And then Monday, be returning to DS9 with my review for the Alternate. So that is what's coming up next on my channel. Be sure to check it out as I continue to cover Star Trek Deep Space Nine and Star Trek Next Generation and Star Trek Lower Decks and many other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.